My name is Olivia Morgan, and I still remember the exact moment my marriage and business partnership shattered into a million pieces. I was standing in our elegantly appointed dining room, champagne flute in hand, surrounded by potential investors and business associates my husband Derek had invited to our home. I had just offered my insight on a proposed partnership deal when Derek's voice cut through the conversation like a knife. "Gentlemen, she's just my wife, not my partner. Let's talk business." In that moment, time seemed to freeze. Faces around the table registered shock, discomfort, and worst of all, pity. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation as years of building our tech company together, late nights coding while Derek handled sales calls, my Stanford business degree, and my grandmother's inheritance that provided our initial startup capital all became meaningless in a single sentence. What Derek didn't realize as he casually dismissed me that evening was that I legally owned 70% of the company we had built together. It wasn't an accident or oversight in our paperwork. It was a deliberate decision we had made years ago for tax purposes that he had dismissed as just legal formalities. As I excused myself from the table that night, maintaining whatever dignity I could salvage, I had no idea that his careless words would become the catalyst for a transformation that would reshape not only our business, but my entire sense of self. This is the story of how I went from being just a wife to reclaiming my rightful place as CEO of a company I helped build from the ground up, and in the process, discovered a strength within myself I never knew existed. Derek and I met at a tech innovation conference in San Francisco 6 years ago, where I was presenting research on emerging consumer behavior patterns in digital spaces. After my presentation, he approached me with intelligent questions and fascinating insights about applications for my research. There was an immediate intellectual connection that felt electric. With his charismatic personality and my strategic thinking, we quickly recognized we could be powerful collaborators. Within weeks, we were not only dating, but sketching out business plans on napkins at our favorite coffee shop. I still have one of those napkins framed in my office as a reminder of how passion and naivety can coexist so beautifully. I had graduated from Stanford with honors in business administration and had worked for 2 major tech companies before deciding I wanted to build something of my own. When my grandmother passed away, leaving me an inheritance of $300,000, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. Derek had brilliant ideas but limited capital, while I had both the funds and the business acumen to turn concepts into reality. We established our company, Innovate Tech, in our small apartment, transforming our second bedroom into an office with mismatched desks from secondhand stores and the fastest internet connection we could afford. Those early days were magical and exhausting. I would stay up coding until 3 a.m., fueled by cheap coffee and ambition, while Derek worked his natural charm on potential clients during the day. We complemented each other perfectly. My technical skills and strategic planning paired with his sales abilities and visionary ideas created a perfect business partnership. When we secured our first major client, a mid-sized retail chain looking to revolutionize their e-commerce experience, we celebrated by splurging on expensive sushi and cheap champagne. Our personal relationship deepened alongside our professional success, and there was no clear boundary between work discussions and romantic ones. When we formally established the company structure, I contributed the majority of the financial capital, so my lawyer suggested I maintain 70% ownership for tax and liability purposes. Derek readily agreed, saying, "The paperwork doesn't matter. Live. We're building this together, and what's mine is yours anyway." I remember smiling at his casual dismissal of what my father, a lifelong business owner, had taught me were critical foundations for any company. But in those early days, our trust and shared vision seemed more important than legal formalities, and his words felt like a testimony to his complete faith in our partnership, rather than a dismissal of my contribution. Our wedding came just as Innovate Tech was gaining real traction in the marketplace. We held a small ceremony at a boutique hotel in Napa Valley, surrounded by family and our growing circle of business connections. Many of our guests were both friends and professional associates, a testament to how thoroughly our personal and business lives had intertwined. Derek looked handsome in his tailored suit, and when he spoke his vows about building a life and legacy together, I believed every word. Within 3 months of saying I do, we signed a lease on our first real office space, a modest but modern suite in a downtown building with actual signage bearing our company logo. The moment we hung that sign was surreal. We had created something real that existed outside of our apartment and our dreams. As revenue increased, we carefully hired our first employees, a skilled developer I had worked with at my previous company, a marketing specialist Derek charmed away from a competitor, and an office manager who kept everything running smoothly. Our team was small but mighty, and each new hire felt like adding a member to our family. My strategic vision for Innovate Tech focused on developing proprietary software solutions that would integrate with existing business infrastructure while providing unprecedented data analysis capabilities. Derek, meanwhile, became increasingly comfortable as the face of the company, presenting at conferences and meeting with potential clients. The first subtle shift in our dynamic came during a board meeting with our small advisory group. I had prepared a comprehensive analysis of market opportunities and growth projections, but as I began my presentation, Derek jumped in, saying, "What my wife is trying to explain is," before essentially repeating my points but taking them in a slightly different direction. After the meeting, I mentioned how uncomfortable his interruption had made me feel. "You were getting too deep in the technical weeds, Liv," he explained with a casual wave of his hand. "These guys don't want all the details. They want the broad strokes in language they understand. I was just translating for you." His explanation made enough sense that I pushed aside my discomfort, telling myself we were playing to our respective strengths. When I discovered I was pregnant with our son Jackson later that year, I was determined not to let impending motherhood diminish my role in the company. I worked right up until the day before my scheduled C-section, making sure every project was organized and every team member knew their responsibilities during my brief absence. Derek seemed supportive, assuring me that everything would be waiting for me when I returned. Motherhood was both more challenging and more rewarding than I had anticipated, and I treasured the precious weeks with our newborn son. When I returned to work, however, subtle changes had taken root. Derek had moved his office to the larger, corner space I had previously occupied, explaining that he had needed more room for meetings while I was away. More concerning was hearing our newest hire refer to Derek as the founder during a team lunch. When I gently corrected that we were co-founders, the employee looked confused and said, "Oh, I thought you were handling the family side of things now." It was the first time I heard myself introduced as Derek's wife at a business function, rather than as Chief Technology Officer and co-founder, but it wouldn't be the last. As Innovate Tech continued to expand, so did Derek's public profile and, unfortunately, his ego. A major tech publication featured our company in their Startups to Watch section, with a 4-page spread dominated by photos of Derek and quotes about his innovative vision. My contribution was reduced to a single line mentioning Derek's wife Olivia, who handles internal operations. When I pointed this out, Derek laughed and said, "That's just how these stories work, babe. They need a face for the company, and I'm the one doing all the interviews and conferences. It's not personal, it's just better marketing." I swallowed my disappointment, telling myself it was indeed better for the business if we had a consistent public representative. But the pattern intensified. Derek was invited to speak at prestigious industry events, joined exclusive CEO roundtables, and began building a network of connections with other tech leaders that specifically excluded me. Dinner invitations would arrive addressed only to him for executive dinners or founders retreats. When I asked about joining, he would say things like, "It's really just a bunch of guys talking shop and drinking scotch. You'd be bored to tears." One particularly painful instance occurred when he was invited to a weekend yacht trip with major potential investors. When I suggested I should attend to help present our technical capabilities, he said, "These guys want to relax and get to know who they're dealing with personally. Having my wife there would change the whole dynamic." The gaslighting became so subtle and pervasive that I began questioning my own perceptions. When I expressed frustration at being increasingly sidelined, Derek would say things like, "You're overreacting," or "You're too sensitive about these things," or, worst of all, "This is why women have a harder time in tech. They take everything personally." My circle of friends had narrowed as the business consumed more of my time, but Rachel, my closest friend since college, noticed the change in me during our increasingly rare lunch dates. "You don't talk about Innovate Tech the same way anymore," she observed over salads. "You used to light up when discussing new projects." but now you seem dimmed somehow." Her observation cut deep because it was true. I was losing my connection to the company I had helped create. The culmination of this phase came during the launch of our most significant product to date, a data integration platform I had conceptualized and overseen development on for 18 months. The night before the launch event, I found myself alone in the office at midnight, finalizing code and ensuring everything would run perfectly for the demonstrations the next day. When morning came, I watched from the side of the stage as Derek presented his brainchild to the industry, never once mentioning my role or the team of developers who had executed the vision. As applause filled the conference hall, I felt a hollowness spreading through my chest. Later, when an industry blogger asked me about my contribution to the platform, Derek stepped between us, put his arm around my shoulder, and said, "My wife handles the details while I focus on the big picture. We make a great team that way." I smiled mechanically while wondering if my contributions really were just details in the grand scheme of our company. That night, I lay awake beside a sleeping Derek, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I had somehow failed to assert myself properly or if my work truly was less valuable than his. The seed of doubt he had planted was blooming into a forest of insecurity, and I couldn't see my way clear anymore. As our personal dynamic deteriorated, Derek's control over our finances, both business and personal, intensified. We had initially maintained separate personal accounts alongside our joint household account, but Derek began insisting that maintaining multiple accounts was inefficient and showed a lack of trust. Reluctantly, I consolidated most of my personal funds into our joint account, maintaining only a small separate savings account that had been established by my parents when I was born. Derek, meanwhile, began making increasingly lavish purchases. A sports car he claimed was necessary for client impressions, an expensive watch collection, and membership at an exclusive golf club where he entertained business associates. When I purchased a new laptop for my work without consulting him, he questioned me extensively about whether the expense was necessary. "We need to be careful with cash flow," he lectured, despite the fact that I had selected a mid-range model, rather than the premium one I actually needed. Maybe check with me before making these decisions in the future. The hypocrisy was glaring, but when I pointed it out, he dismissed my concerns, saying his purchases were investments in our business relationships, while mine were personal indulgences. I began noticing other concerning patterns as well. Despite my role as CTO, I was gradually being excluded from financial discussions about the company. Board meetings increasingly featured complicated financial reports that hadn't been shared with me beforehand, putting me at a disadvantage during discussions. One evening while working late, I discovered an irregularity in our company books. A substantial consulting fee paid to a company I'd never heard of. When I searched our systems, I could find no work product or deliverables from this consultant. The next morning, I casually asked Derek about it. His face tightened momentarily before he launched into a condescending explanation about high-level business development consultants who worked on confidential projects. "This is why we have a division of responsibilities, Liv," he said with thinly veiled impatience. "I handle these business relationships because, frankly, your strength is in the technical side, not the financial aspects. You wouldn't understand the complexities involved." His dismissal was so absolute, so confident that for a moment I questioned whether I was overstepping. But my Stanford business degree and years of experience told me something wasn't right. After that conversation, I became more cautious, but also more determined to understand what was happening at my own company. I reached out to Megan, a former classmate who had become a forensic accountant, and invited her to lunch under the guise of catching up. After carefully describing the situation without naming names, Megan confirmed my suspicions. "What you're describing sounds like textbook financial manipulation, possibly even fraud if company funds are being misappropriated." Her words sent a chill through me, but also crystallized my growing awareness that something systemic was wrong. That evening, I received a bank notification about a large transfer from our joint personal account to an account I didn't recognize. When I questioned Derek about it, he became unusually defensive. "I moved some of our investments around for better returns. Do I need to clear every financial decision with you now?" His reaction only heightened my suspicions. The next day, I used the administrative access I still maintained as CTO to conduct a deeper audit of our company's financial records. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Derek had established a separate corporate entity that was receiving significant consulting fees from Innovatech with no corresponding services rendered. Essentially, he was siphoning company profits into his personal control. More alarmingly, I found email communications suggesting he was meeting with lawyers about restructuring the company ownership in a way that would dilute my 70% stake without my knowledge. I felt physically ill reading these exchanges, but a strange calm also settled over me. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the financial deception, it all formed a clear pattern that I could no longer ignore or explain away. That night, I contacted our corporate attorney under the pretense of updating my will for estate planning purposes and requested a complete review of my ownership position in the company. His confirmation came the next day. My 70% ownership remained legally intact and would require my explicit signed consent to change. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of control returning. I also opened a new personal bank account at a different bank and began quietly transferring small amounts of money from our joint account, preparing for whatever might come next. The dinner party that ultimately changed everything was Derek's idea. An intimate gathering at our home with potential investors and business partners he had been courting for months. "This is going to take Innovatech to the next level," he announced, asking me to handle the arrangements while he focused on the important parts of preparing for the evening. I threw myself into the preparations, not just the menu and decor, but also thoroughly researching each guest, their companies, investment history, and potential synergies with our business. I prepared detailed briefing notes for a strategic discussion and developed projections for how their investment could be utilized. I wanted to prove, perhaps mostly to myself, that I was still an essential part of this company. Our modern home looked impeccable when guests began arriving, 6 men and 2 women, all significant players in the tech investment world. I greeted each personally, making connections with the women especially, who seemed relieved to find another female in the room. Derek played the charming host, directing conversation and making sure drinks were refilled promptly. Through the appetizers and main course, business discussion remained general. Market trends, recent IPOs, the competitive landscape. I contributed where I could, but noticed Derek subtly cutting me off or redirecting whenever I gained conversational momentum. One of the female investors, Catherine, began asking me specific questions about our data architecture, clearly recognizing my technical expertise. I felt a moment of professional recognition that had become increasingly rare. As dessert was served, the conversation shifted to the specific opportunity Derek had gathered everyone to discuss, a potential partnership and investment round that would fuel our expansion into international markets. When Catherine asked about our technical readiness for such scaling, I began explaining our infrastructure preparation and the development roadmap I had created. I was mid-sentence when Derek interrupted, placing his hand on my arm to silence me. "Gentlemen and ladies," he added with a nod to the women present, "she's just my wife, not my partner. Let's talk actual business." The room fell momentarily silent. I felt blood rushing to my face as the humiliation washed over me. Several guests looked uncomfortable, while others seemed to find their dessert suddenly fascinating. Catherine's eyes met mine with unmistakable sympathy and a flash of anger on my behalf. I excused myself calmly, mentioning the need to check on coffee service, and retreated to our kitchen. With shaking hands, I gripped the counter edge, taking deep breaths to compose myself. Through the partially open door, I could hear Derek, smoothly resuming the conversation, his voice confident and dismissive. Between us, the business would be nothing without my connections and vision. She's got some technical skills, sure, but she's lucky I let her be involved at all. You know how it is? Happy wife, happy life. Laughter followed, though it sounded forced from some. In that moment, a strange clarity washed over me. This wasn't a bad patch in our marriage or a communication issue we could resolve. This was a fundamental lack of respect and recognition for who I was and what I had built. The man in that dining room wasn't just dismissing me as a business partner. He was erasing my very identity, my contributions, my intelligence. I had been making excuses for Derek's behavior for years, always finding reasonable explanations, or blaming myself for not asserting my position firmly enough. But hearing him so casually dismiss everything I had poured into our company, my grandmother's inheritance, my education, my countless hours of work, something crystallized within me. I realized with startling clarity that our relationship, both professional and personal, was beyond repair. What surprised me most was not the pain I felt, but the calm determination that settled over me. I returned to the dining room with coffee, service, my face composed into a pleasant hostess smile that revealed nothing of the seismic shift that had just occurred within me. I maintained that facade throughout the remainder of the evening, playing the role of supportive wife one final time while my mind cataloged resources, planned next steps, and began to envision a future very different from my past. As I bid goodnight to our last guest, Catherine pressed her business card into my hand with a meaningful look. "Call me," she whispered. "Anytime." I nodded, tucking the card away like the lifeline it would later prove to be. When the door closed, behind them, Derek was already loosening his tie, looking pleased with himself. "I think that went well," he said, oblivious to the transformation that had occurred in me. "Jenkins is practically ready to write a check." I said nothing about his public humiliation of me. There seemed little point. Instead, I began clearing dessert plates, already mentally packing my things and planning my exit from both my marriage and the power dynamic that had slowly crushed my spirit. The morning after the dinner party, I woke up with purpose and clarity I hadn't felt in years. While Derek slept, I slipped out of bed and began what would become a month-long secret investigation into both our company and my legal options. My first step was to meet with Andrea Baldwin, a highly respected business attorney I had met during a Women in Tech mentorship program years earlier. I secured an early morning appointment before office hours to ensure Derek wouldn't notice my absence. In her sleek downtown office, I laid out the entire situation: my 70% ownership stake, Derek's financial manipulations, and my suspicions about his plans to dilute my ownership. Andrea listened intently, occasionally making notes, but mostly maintaining steady eye contact that provided more comfort than I'd expected. "What you're describing is unfortunately not uncommon," she said when I finished, "but your foresight in maintaining majority ownership gives us significant leverage. Before we proceed, we need to gather comprehensive evidence of both your contributions to the company and any financial impropriety." She outlined a methodical approach that would require discretion and patience. "This isn't just about asserting your legal rights," she explained. "It's about positioning yourself to take control in a way that preserves the company's value and reputation." From Andrea's office, I went directly to a new bank and opened accounts in my name only, then used my lunch hour to visit a private investigator she had recommended. The PI specialized in financial fraud and could help document Derek's questionable transactions in a court-admissible way. My next task was to thoroughly document my contributions to the company since its inception. Each evening after Derek fell asleep, I would slip into our home office and meticulously gather evidence. Emails documenting my development of our core intellectual property, meeting notes showing my strategic input, client communications praising my technical solutions, and financial records showing my initial investment. I purchased a high-security cloud storage account where I uploaded everything, organizing it meticulously for potential legal proceedings. Through careful observation, I discovered Derek had been having regular meetings with a small group of executives and lawyers at a private club downtown. Using my still active administrative privileges, I was able to access his calendar and email, confirming my worst fears. He was actively planning a corporate restructuring that would effectively push me out while maintaining the appearance of a fair separation. One document outlined a strategy to pressure me to convert my ownership stake into non-voting shares in exchange for an executive title. I had to be extremely careful not to leave any digital footprints as I gathered this information, knowing that discovery would accelerate his plans. Meanwhile, I began quietly building alliances within the company. Jennifer, our head of product development, who had always respected my technical leadership, became a valuable confidant. Without revealing my full intentions, I shared some concerns about the company's direction and was surprised when she confided similar misgivings about Derek's leadership. "The development team still considers you the real technical authority," she admitted. "There's been a lot of confusion about the chain of command lately." Through Jennifer, I learned that morale had been suffering as Derek implemented increasingly arbitrary decisions without technical merit. Several key developers were considering leaving, which could devastate our product roadmap. This information strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about saving a company that employed dozens of talented people doing valuable work. My investigation also revealed the extent of Derek's financial misconduct. The consulting company receiving large payments was registered to his college roommate, with payments being funneled back to accounts Derek controlled. He had also been charging excessive personal expenses to the company, from luxury vacations categorized as business development to an apartment I never knew about. Each discovery hurt, but also fortified my determination. The most challenging aspect was maintaining normalcy at home and work while conducting this shadow investigation. I forced myself to continue playing the role of supportive wife and sidelined CTO, swallowing my increasing disgust at Derek's manipulation. I focused on our son Jackson, now 4, whose innocent happiness became my emotional anchor. During this period, I also reached out to Catherine, the investor from the dinner party. Over coffee, I carefully broached my concerns about the company's direction without explicitly revealing my plans. Her response surprised me. "I've been watching your husband take credit for what is clearly your vision for years," she said. "The investment community isn't as fooled as he thinks." Her validation of my experience was like oxygen after years of suffocation. By the end of 4 intense weeks, I had assembled a comprehensive dossier documenting both my rightful position in the company and Derek's misdeeds. Working with Andrea, I developed a strategic plan that would allow me to assert control while minimizing disruption to the business. We prepared legal documents, coordinated with the PI's evidence, and developed contingency plans for various scenarios. The final piece came when Andrea connected me with Sarah Chen, a PR strategist specializing in corporate leadership transitions, who would help manage the inevitable public narrative. As we finalized preparations, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for the relationship I had once treasured, fear of the confrontation to come, but predominantly a growing sense of personal power that had been dormant for too long. "You're more prepared than most clients I've represented in similar situations," Andrea told me during our final planning meeting. "You've thought of everything." Not quite everything, I thought to myself. I couldn't have anticipated how Derek's disdainful words at that dinner party would ultimately be the catalyst for reclaiming not just my company, but myself. I chose a Sunday for the confrontation, arranging for Jackson to spend the day with my sister under the pretense of cousin playtime. I wanted privacy for what would inevitably be a volatile conversation, and protection for our son from witnessing the likely fallout. I spent the morning in unusual calm, organizing the final documents and mentally rehearsing what I needed to say. When Derek returned from his golf game, I was waiting in our home office with 2 folders neatly placed on the desk. "We need to talk," I said simply, gesturing to the chair across from me. His initial expression was one of mild irritation at having his post-golf relaxation interrupted, but something in my demeanor must have communicated the seriousness of the moment. "What's going on, Liv?" he asked, reluctantly taking the seat. I slid the first folder toward him. "This contains documentation of financial irregularities I've discovered in the company accounts. Specifically, payments to shell companies you, control, personal expenses fraudulently charged to Innovate Tech, and evidence of your plans to push me out of the company." His face shifted from confusion to shock, then to a practiced innocence that might once have convinced me. "I don't know what you think you found, but you're obviously misinterpreting normal business operations," he began, not even bothering to open the folder. "This is why I handle the financial side, Olivia. You don't understand how these things work." The familiarity of his condescension almost made me smile. It was so predictable, so much a part of the pattern I'd finally recognized. "That brings me to the second folder," I continued calmly, pushing it toward him. "This one contains comprehensive documentation of my 70% ownership stake in Innovate Tech, along with a detailed accounting of my contributions to the company's intellectual property, growth strategy, and client relationships." This time he did open the folder, his confident expression faltering as he scanned the contents. "You and I both know that ownership structure was just a paper formality," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Nobody actually thinks you own 70% of the company." "The law does," I replied simply. "And based on the evidence in the first folder, I have grounds to take immediate control of company operations and initiate proceedings for financial restitution." For the first time, I saw real fear flash across his face. The power dynamic had shifted so suddenly, he seemed unable to process it. Then his expression hardened. No judge will side with you over me. I'm the face of Innovate Tech. I'm the one who built the client relationships and investor confidence. You're just the behind-the-scenes tech support. I had anticipated anger, but the sheer dismissiveness still stung. That's where you're wrong, Derek. I'm not going to court. Yet. I'm giving you an opportunity to make this transition civilized. I outlined the terms my legal team had prepared: his resignation as CEO, financial restitution for misappropriated funds, and a reasonable severance package in exchange for a clean separation from both the company and our marriage. His incredulity quickly morphed into rage. You think you can just take everything we've built? You're nothing without me. Who's going to trust a company run by my wife? The way he spat the last word made it sound like an insult. I guess we'll find out, I said, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. But considering I'm the one who developed our core technology, led the development team, and maintained relationships with our technical partners, I like my chances. He stood abruptly, looming over the desk in an implicit threat. You do this, and I'll make sure everyone knows you're an unstable, vindictive woman who couldn't handle the pressure. I'll tell them you neglected our son for your career ambitions. I'll destroy your reputation in this industry. I had expected this too, and was prepared. Every word of this conversation is being recorded, Derek, and I have documentation of your threats to our corporate counsel. This wasn't strictly true, the recording part, but he had no way of knowing that. His face contorted with fury, but uncertainty had crept into his eyes. Get out of my house, he hissed. Actually, according to our prenuptial agreement and California community property laws, this is our house, I corrected him. But I've already arranged temporary accommodations for myself and Jackson while this is resolved. The mention of our son seemed to momentarily puncture his anger. You're taking my son? I'm taking our son to stay with my sister until you've had time to process this conversation, and we can discuss co-parenting arrangements civilly. I stood, gathering my purse and the third folder I hadn't shown him, the one containing our personal financial documentation. My attorney will contact you tomorrow to begin formal proceedings. I suggest you retain counsel immediately. As I walked toward the door, he called after me, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. This isn't over, Olivia. You have no idea what you're doing. I turned back one last time. That's exactly what you've always underestimated about me, Derek. I know precisely what I'm doing. The weight that lifted from my shoulders as I walked out that door was almost dizzying. I had prepared for every contingency, except how liberating it would feel to finally stand up for myself. The next week was a blur of legal meetings, emergency board sessions, and careful communications with key employees and clients. Derek fought back, of course, attempting to freeze company accounts and contacting investors to undermine confidence in my leadership. But Andrea had anticipated these moves, and we had preventative measures in place. The evidence of financial impropriety gave us significant leverage, as Derek quickly realized that fighting me might mean facing criminal charges. 10 days after our confrontation, he accepted a modified version of our original proposal, a smaller severance package in exchange for his resignation and a non-disparagement agreement. The company's transition announcement was carefully crafted to emphasize continuity and innovation under my leadership, acknowledging Derek's contributions while clearly establishing me as the founder and rightful CEO. There were challenges, certainly. Some clients initially expressed concern, and a few longtime employees loyal to Derek resigned. But the majority of the team rallied behind me, particularly the technical staff who had always recognized my contributions. Jackson struggled with the sudden changes in his life, asking repeatedly when we would go home to Daddy. Those moments tested my resolve more than any business challenge, but I remained committed to creating a healthy new normal for him, with regular time with his father once Derek had worked through some of his anger. Through it all, I maintained a calm, professional demeanor that belied the emotional turbulence beneath. There were nights I cried myself to sleep in my sister's guest room, questioning whether I had made the right choice in blowing up our family. But each morning, I would wake with renewed purpose and the growing certainty that reclaiming my power was not just right for me, but ultimately better for Jackson too. He deserved a mother who modeled strength and self-respect, not one who accepted being diminished and devalued. 6 weeks after the initial confrontation, I moved with Jackson into a new home, symbolically located halfway between my sister's place and our former house where Derek still lived. As I unpacked our belongings in the bright, airy rooms that represented our fresh start, I found myself smiling at the thought of the company board meeting scheduled for the following day, my first as the officially recognized CEO of Innovatech. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, I was walking a path of my own choosing. My first official day as CEO of Innovatech began with both symbolism and substance. I arrived at the office early, before most employees, and moved into the glass-walled corner office that had traditionally belonged to the company leadership. Derek had claimed this space years ago when I was on maternity leave, and now reclaiming it felt like an important marker of the company's new direction. I arranged my workspace thoughtfully. Family photos, including Jackson, technology awards. The company had won under my technical direction, and most prominently, that framed napkin with our original business sketch. By 9 a.m., I had called an all-hands meeting in our largest conference room. Facing the assembled staff, some curious, some anxious, some clearly supportive, I acknowledged the elephant in the room immediately. As you all know, Innovatech is undergoing significant leadership changes. I want to be transparent about what this means for each of you and for our company's future. I outlined my vision for the company moving forward, emphasizing continuity in our core mission while introducing new transparency in decision-making processes and a renewed focus on technical excellence. Questions came cautiously at first, then more boldly as employees sensed my openness to dialogue. The relief in the room was palpable when I addressed concerns about job security and ongoing projects. By the meeting's end, the initial tension had largely dissipated, replaced by cautious optimism and a few expressions of outright support. The next priority was meeting individually with our key clients. I expected skepticism and had prepared for it thoroughly, arming myself with detailed knowledge of each client's projects and needs. The reactions varied widely. Some, particularly those who had worked directly with me on technical matters over the years, were unsurprised and supportive. Honestly, we always thought of you as the brains behind the operation anyway, one CTO told me bluntly. Others required more reassurance, particularly those whose relationships had been primarily with Derek. A few expressed concerns about family drama affecting business stability. I addressed these head-on. The legal and ownership matters have been resolved. Innovatech's operations and client services remain our absolute priority, with added benefits from our streamlined leadership structure. One client meeting in particular stood out. Robert Jenkins, CEO of a major retail chain and a longtime golf buddy of Derek's, arrived with thinly veiled condescension. "So, Derek's wife is taking over," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. "I'm concerned about whether the same level of executive understanding will continue." I let the sexism in his statement hover in the air for a moment before responding. "Mr. Jenkins, I founded Innovatech with my technical vision and capital investment. I've led the development of every product your company currently uses, including the inventory management system that saved you $3.2 million last quarter. I understand you and Derek shared a friendship, but our business relationship will be based on Innovatech's continued delivery of exceptional technology solutions under my leadership." His surprised expression would have been comical if it weren't so revealing of the perceptions I was now battling. By the end of our meeting, his tone had shifted markedly, and he left with assurances that his company would maintain our contract. Beyond these immediate relationship-building efforts, I implemented structural changes that had been in my mental pipeline for years. I flattened our overly hierarchical management structure, instituted transparent project budgeting, and most importantly, created a formal innovation pipeline that gave developers protected time to explore new ideas. This last initiative had been repeatedly blocked by Derek, who preferred directing innovation from the top down. The industry response to our leadership transition was predictably mixed. Tech blogs speculated wildly about internal power struggles and family business drama. Some published thinly sourced stories clearly fed by Derek's perspective. Rather than responding directly to gossip, I focused on demonstrable performance. Under my leadership, we accelerated product development timelines, increased code quality, metrics, and most tellingly, improved client satisfaction scores. I also began implementing ideas Derek had dismissed as too ambitious or technically challenging. Our distributed database architecture, a project I had championed for years, finally moved into development. Our machine learning initiative, previously underfunded, received proper resources and quickly produced promising results. Financial stability was my most pressing concern. I knew Derek would be approaching investors to undermine confidence in my leadership, so I preemptively scheduled meetings with our major financial backers. Catherine, the investor from that fateful dinner party, proved instrumental in arranging these conversations. "The investment community values results above all," she advised. "Come with data, not drama." I followed her counsel, presenting comprehensive financial projections and technical roadmaps that demonstrated both vision and pragmatism. Most investors responded positively, though a few made patronizing suggestions about hiring a seasoned male CEO to support me. I politely declined. 3 months into my leadership, we faced our first major crisis when a competitor launched a product remarkably similar to our flagship service. The similarity suggested information leakage, and internal investigation confirmed my suspicion. Derek had shared proprietary information before his departure. This could have been devastating, but we responded with remarkable agility, accelerating the release of our next-generation architecture that made the competitor's offering look instantly outdated. The incident actually strengthened our market, position, and team cohesion. Press coverage gradually shifted from gossip about our leadership change to substantive coverage of our technical innovations. 6 months after taking control, I was invited to speak at the same prestigious tech conference where Derek had previously represented us. Standing on that stage, presenting our vision for the future of data architecture to an engaged audience, I experienced a profound sense of rightness. This was where I belonged, not in the shadows, not as just a wife, but as a technical visionary and business leader in my own right. The most telling validation came in our year-end financials. Under my leadership, Innovate Tech had increased revenue by 32% while significantly reducing operational costs through more efficient management. Our client retention rate stood at 96%, and employee satisfaction scores had improved dramatically. These weren't just numbers. They were vindication of what I had always known. I wasn't just capable of leading Innovate Tech. The company actually thrived better under my authentic leadership than it had under Derek's charismatic but less substantive direction. As I presented these results to our board, I caught Catherine's subtle nod of approval from across the table. Later, she pulled me aside. "You've done the impossible," she said. "You've taken a potentially company-killing transition and turned it into a success story." I smiled, thinking of how far I'd come from that humiliated woman in our dining room just a year earlier. "Not impossible," I corrected her, "just incredibly difficult and absolutely necessary." That evening, I picked up Jackson from school myself, a privilege my flexible CEO schedule now permitted regularly. As he chattered excitedly about his day, I reflected on how our lives had transformed. The journey had been painful and challenging, but watching my son grow up seeing his mother in a position of earned authority rather than diminished value made every difficult moment worthwhile. Innovate Tech wasn't just surviving under my leadership, it was evolving into the company I had always envisioned it could be. 2 years have passed since that pivotal dinner party when Derek's casual dismissal of my worth triggered the reclamation of my company and myself. Innovate Tech has not merely survived the transition, it has flourished beyond my most optimistic projections. Last quarter, we exceeded our revenue targets by 40%, completed a successful expansion into European markets, and were featured in Forbes as one of the most innovative companies to watch. Our newly designed headquarters, a light-filled campus with collaborative spaces and cutting-edge facilities, stands as a physical manifestation of our transformation. But the metrics of business success, gratifying as they are, pale in comparison to the personal growth this journey has catalyzed. The woman I was 3 years ago, gradually diminished by subtle undermining, questioning her own value, accepting less than she deserved, sometimes feels like a stranger to me now. The most profound change has been in my relationship with Jackson, now 7 and flourishing. Initially, our separation from Derek created confusion and anxiety for him, as any major family restructuring would. We worked with a child psychologist to help him process the changes, and over time, established a new normal that prioritized his emotional security. Today, he speaks proudly to his friends about his mom who runs a tech company and builds cool computer stuff. Recently, his teacher called to tell me he had announced to his class during career day that he wanted to be a boss like my mom who helps people do their best work. Hearing those words, I felt a vindication deeper than any business success could provide. My relationship with Derek evolved too, though not without difficult passages. The initial months after our separation were characterized by his attempts to undermine me professionally and personally. He contested our custody arrangement, spread rumors in the industry, and on one particularly low occasion, tried to convince Jackson that Mom took Daddy's company. But reality has a way of asserting itself. As Innovatech thrived under my leadership and his new ventures struggled to gain traction, his narrative became increasingly difficult to maintain. The turning point came at Jackson's school play about 18 months after our separation. We both attended, sitting on opposite sides of the auditorium. Afterward, watching Jackson's face light up at seeing both his parents there to support him, Derek and I managed our first civil conversation in over a year. "He's doing really well," Derek acknowledged. "You're doing a good job with him?" It wasn't an apology for everything that had transpired, but it was a beginning. Since then, we've established a workable co-parenting relationship built on clear boundaries and focused on Jackson's well-being. Derek has even referred potential clients to Innovatech on occasions when his new consulting firm wasn't the right fit for their needs, a small but meaningful acknowledgement of professional respect. The personal growth extends beyond family relationships. I've become intentional about mentoring women in tech, establishing a formal program at Innovatech that pairs promising female engineers and business strategists with senior leaders. 23 women have completed the program so far, with several moving into leadership positions either within our company or elsewhere in the industry. My experience has made me passionate about helping others recognize and resist the subtle diminishment that can occur in both personal and professional relationships. Last month, Catherine and I launched a quarterly dinner series for women business leaders to share experiences and strategies in a supportive environment. Our first event sold out within hours, revealing the hunger for this kind of authentic connection and mentorship. On the personal front, I've recently begun dating again, cautiously and with a much clearer sense of what healthy partnership looks like. Michael, a pediatric surgeon I met through a mutual friend, approaches relationships with the same commitment to equality and respect that I now require. It's too early to know where this connection might lead, but the simple fact that I can trust my judgment again feels like a victory in itself. This journey has taught me lessons I carry into each day, that self-worth must come from within before it can be recognized by others. That silence in the face of disrespect only enables more disrespect. That strength isn't about never falling, but about how you rise after being knocked down. Most importantly, I've learned that reclaiming your power doesn't require becoming harsh or vengeful. In fact, I lead with more compassion and authenticity now than I did before, because true strength has nothing to prove. If my story resonates with you, perhaps you're facing your own version of being diminished or dismissed in ways large or small. My hope is that you'll recognize what took me too long to see, that no one has the right to define your value or limit your potential. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply to claim the space that was always rightfully yours. As for me, when I look at the framed napkin with our original company sketch that still hangs in my office, I no longer feel the twinge of what was lost. Instead, I see the blueprint of what I've rebuilt, stronger and truer to my vision than before. That dinner party where Derek said I was just his wife, not his partner, didn't mark the end of my story. It was merely the wake-up call that began a new chapter. And for that, ironically, I'm grateful. Have you ever faced a situation where someone underestimated your worth or contribution? How did you respond, and what did you learn from the experience? I would love to hear your stories in the comments. Remember that recognizing your own value is the first step toward having others recognize it too. Thank you for listening to my journey from diminishment to empowerment. I truly believe that by sharing our stories, we create possibilities for others to write new endings to their own. Retry me.